looked up from the table slowly, casting a caring gaze towards my mother. Her eyes were red and puffy, her cheeks shiny from falling tears. I did not dare look at my father, whose piercing eyes would send me spiraling into another panic attack. The only option was to look back down at my Cheerios, which were drowning in milk. I picked up my spoon in my shaking hand, trying to steady it so that no one would notice. I filled my spoon with milk and poured it in my mouth. The cold milk soothed my aching throat. My voice was nearly hoarse from the events of last night. I shuddered at the memory. As soon as I had seen my father with a beer bottle in his hand, with 3 others littered on the floor, I knew it was coming, and yet I still asked him. I knew I would regret it later, but I saw just a glimmer of hope that he would say yes. I brought the pen and the form out from behind my back and said, "Mr. Mason, my drama teacher, he told me about this amazing opportunity. It's a trip to New York. He said that he could organize an audition for me for a real Broadway show. I just need you to sign here." I moved the paper and pen so that he could see them. "Please, I would really—" He slurred his words, yelling,
"Why the hell should I help you? You only think about yourself. Come here, you useless piece of shit."
In my panic, I blurted out, "Dad, please, I don't—" His face began to turn a shade of red. I could have sworn that I saw some steam pour out of his ears.
"No!"
He roared at me like a lion who has caught its prey. He pressed his hands against the armrest of the chair in an attempt to stand, just to realize he was too drunk to lift himself.
"Get over here, now!"
He beckoned me forward with a flick of his hand and the stomp of his foot. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. His hand was gripping his beer bottle so tight I thought he might actually crush it. My heart was beating so hard it almost beat right out of my chest. I reluctantly shuffled forward along the rough gray carpet. Dropping his beer bottle to the floor, he thrust his hands on my shoulder and pushed me down. I yelped in surprise. He grabbed my throat right below my chin and yanked up. I tried to grasp for air, but I was unsuccessful. Darkness began to seep into my vision. My only thought was of the increasing pressure against my throat. I tilted my head up to increase the distance between his hand and my face. I could feel the spilled beer soaking my knees through my jeans. Tears started to fall down my cheeks, down my chin, onto my father's hand. A smug grin crept upon his face. This was the first time I had seen him smile in weeks, and he was smiling at my pain. His other hand rose and came down hard on my cheek. The skin under his hand stung like hell. My whole face lit on fire.
"Do you respect me, you little shit?"
He barked, his voice coarse as sandpaper. "No," I thought to myself. "Yes, sir," I replied timidly, despite what my mind kept telling me.
"Do you trust me?"
"No." "Yes, sir."
"Do you care about me?"
"No." "Yes, sir." He paused for a second, narrowing his eyes, furrowing his brow. He glared at me right in the eyes like a hawk glares at a mouse before guzzling it down, giving it a slow, painful death. He leaned in close so that our faces were almost touching. Chills slowly slithered down my spine, trickling down. His gravelly voice struck my face and scraped my ears like thousands of rough stones.
"Then act like it."
He rose his hand once again, but stopped suddenly. Footsteps echoed down the stairs. At first I thought the sound was just my imagination, something created by my mind to give me a sense of salvation. But then I saw my mother march into the room, terrified but brave. She took my place. She took the beatings and told me to go. I ran up the stairs to my bedroom and hid there for the rest of the night. My mind returned from the dark violence of the night to the blinding silence of the morning. Just thinking of that made my head pound and my stomach ache. I looked at my watch and saw that it was 7:45. I held back my sigh of relief. It was finally time to walk to school, walk away from this mess of a home. I asked to be excused from the table, and my request was granted. I tossed my dishes into the sink, threw my backpack on my back, and ran out the door as fast as my shaking legs could take me. I ran and ran and ran, because I knew that once I got to school, I could show Mr. Mason the permission slip signed by my parents. My mother, my savior, signed the permission slip and forged my father's signature. This single piece of paper could change everything. This single piece of paper could bring me to safety and happiness. This single piece of paper could save me from this house, this family, this life. It had been 3 days since the plane flight to Manhattan, since I last saw my parents, since the torment and the endless pain. My feet led me to the stage. As I came out from behind the curtains, I was blinded by the frighteningly bright lights attached to the ceiling at all different angles. I looked back into the wings of the theater to see Mr. Mason leaning against the wall, smiling and encouraging at me. He looked so confident that I would do well, confident that I would succeed, confident that I would get away from my family and be happy. I wish I had his confidence. Earlier that morning, Emma, my best friend in the whole world, pulled me aside in our hotel room. She said,
"Now, I know you're worried for your audition, but you are quite literally the most amazingly talented person I ever met. You are also the most incredibly beautiful person I've ever met."
At this point, I knew that she was just lying to make me feel better, but I let her continue.
You know what would make you even more beautiful, though? Makeup.
For the next 20 minutes, she was painting, brushing, and sculpting my face with her makeup. I looked up at the mirror, terrified of what I might see. I saw myself and I just stared. For the first time in my life, I felt truly beautiful.
My hazel eyes were saturated by the contrasting blues on my eyelids. My eyelashes looked 5 times longer than the normal little stubs protruding from my eyelids. My cheeks, which are usually red and splotchy, were perfectly colored. I could not help but stare at myself. I finally felt confident that I could go through with the audition. My mind snapped back to the theater surrounding me. The darkness over the seats in the audience battled the light on the stage for precedence. A lump rose in my stomach to my throat. I looked out over the empty theater. Only 3 seats were filled. Straining my eyes, I could just barely see the shadowy silhouettes of the 3 casting directors. A deep, scratchy voice echoed through the grand theater, saying,
"Whenever you're ready, go ahead and start."
I looked down at my shaking hands and put them behind my back. I took a deep breath. I opened my mouth to speak, but words failed to come out. My sentences were lodged in my throat, stripping me of my ability to breathe. All the blood in my body began to rush to my head. My vision blurred and colorful spots danced in front of my eyes. My knees buckled beneath me, unable to hold my weight. I crumpled down into a ball on the floor, taking only rapid, shallow breaths. The blinding stage lights pointed right into my eyes. I tried to move my head away, but I could not muster the strength. I felt my weight double, triple, quadruple, crushing me. I felt as though the stage was melting away beneath me as I sunk deeper and deeper into the earth. My eyelids were too heavy to keep open any longer. They slowly shut, enveloping me in darkness. I heard sounds all around me. Muffled shouting, footsteps, creaks and groans from the theater. A sense of claustrophobia creeped up and swallowed me whole. I still couldn't breathe. My lungs were crushed under the weight. Every moment of violence I had ever experienced flooded back in my memories. My mind was filled with fear and anger and sadness and terror. My mind seemed to have a seizure, spazzing from one negative memory to another. I tried to remind myself of where I was, but my mind began to shut down. I could not think. I could only lay there, helpless, crushed under the emotional and physical weight from which there was no escape. My father had been right when he told me that I couldn't do it, when he told me to stay home, when he called me a failure. He was right. I am a failure. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor brought me back to reality. The darkness around me flooded away as my eyes fluttered open. The bright white room was filled with colorful paintings and stickers, as though those would make me feel better, as though a butterfly on the ceiling would make me forget all of my problems and just be happy. The door creaked open. A woman in a long white coat walked in carrying a clipboard with papers clipped to it. She asked me how I was feeling. I mentally assessed myself. My head, throat, and stomach ached. I told her my symptoms. She nodded and scribbled something down on her papers. I asked her how long I had been in the hospital. She sighed and informed me that I had been there for 77 hours. My head started to swirl. 77 hours? Is it too late to make it back to the audition? As the doctor was about to leave the room, Mr. Mason walked in. He gave me a reassuring smile and nodded hello to the doctor. She nodded back and walked out of the room. I wanted to close my eyes and go back to sleep, but I knew that Mr. Mason would want to talk. He hesitantly said,
"Your dad is here."
The whole room started to spin. The ache throughout my body intensified. Why was my father here? What would he do to me? As if on cue, my father, the devil himself, burst into the room.
His face was beet red and his fists were clenched. All of the noise around me was replaced by silence, and then a high-pitched ringing. My father's mouth was moving, but I could not hear the sound. My heart beat 1,000 times faster, yet it was still completely silent. I tried to sink into the hospital bed and away from this man who had tortured me my whole life, but the mattress kept me in place. My father walked towards me. He glared at Mr. Mason. Mason got the hint and left the room. Left me. Here. With no one but my father. As soon as the door closed, my father began to lift his hand to beat me. As though in slow motion, I saw his hand unfurl and come closer. Closer. Closer to my face. I closed my eyes and tried to travel to another world. A world where this would never happen. A world where I didn't flinch at every raised hand in class, at every high five. A world where I could just be happy. I was helpless. I always have been. I always will be.
Step one, you say we need to talk. He walks, you say sit down, it's just talk. He smiles politely back at you, you stare politely.